Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today we're talking about delayed symptoms after head injury and why traumatic brain injuries are not always immediately apparent following a crash. Sagi, good to see you.
Good seeing you again, Sean.
So today we're talking about the timing of symptoms, Sagi. So why is it that, symptoms of a traumatic brain injury sometimes take hours or even days to appear after an accident? Like, how does that come into play in your work?
So, not every brain injury is identical. So, you have some people who have immediate problems, and then sometimes it doesn't show up for a little bit afterwards. Imagine someone's in a crash, the adrenaline's pumping, they're in shock, the chaos of the moment. You have masking symptoms. They might have fractured something and they're dealing with that, or their bone. We had a case where the bone was sticking out. The last thing the person was thinking about was,
Yes.
I'm having these other issues. My bone is sticking out of my body, it's pretty bad. So it depends. Sometimes they come about right away. And a lot of times there's what they call that delayed onset, where it comes upon gradually because you have swelling or inflammation or disruption of the normal brain function. And that's more noticeable over time. So sometimes also when you get to the hospital, they're drugging you, right? They're putting all types of, morphine and other types of narcotics so you don't have to deal with the pain. So the last thing the person is able to, nobody knows that they think that he's normal like this, or that he's just the effects of the drugs. So really,
Yeah. I
you
bet
really
if I'm sedated in some way, right, then my discernment in terms of what else is happening is probably diminished too.
exactly.
Yeah. You're the attorney. You're not a brain surgeon, so to speak, but I know you've worked in this field for a long time. What's your understanding of what happens inside the brain that causes symptoms to develop gradually instead of right out of the gate?
So what happens to the brain, it can go through what they call a cascade of changes, and it doesn't always peak right away. That's why every brain injury is different. So you can have microscopic changes to brain tissue or inflammation, chemical imbalances, changing on how the neurons communicate, the axons and neurons. And we have, 80 billion connections in the brain. So it can build up over hours, days, and sometimes even weeks or months. It just depends on the brain injury. Everybody's different. So symptoms like a headache, confusion, or cognitive difficulty can come about later on. It doesn't have to come all about at that same moment, at the moment of the crash. Again, think about it. People are hysterical after a crash. Some people cry. Some people are in shock. Some people are passed out and they don't even know what's going on.
You used the term earlier, delayed onset brain injury cases, which is, fairly self-explanatory. You mentioned headaches. I'm curious, are there other warning signs that tend to emerge first? Have you seen patterns around that?
Yeah, so headaches obviously is the most obvious one. Why are you having headaches or migraines? But think about nausea, dizziness, fatigue, sensitivity to light or noise, and then just not feeling right. You know when you're feeling right because you have that normally. And then some people have what they call brain fog, right? They just can't think of the words they want to bring out, or they're just irritable. You have a person who's normally never gets excited about anything or never gets upset, and suddenly they're just quickly upset. And that could be because again the brain is injured. They're maybe not sleeping well. You don't sleep well. After a while, it's going to get you upset. And then it leads to depression, and then maybe there's trouble focusing. So those are the kinds of things that people should be really looking out for immediately on the days and weeks after an event, a traumatic event.
I'm curious about how the cognitive issues, like memory problems, maybe brain fog falls into this category, a slower processing experience. How do those begin to surface over time? It's got to probably unique to every case, right? And not everybody has all the things.
Right. It would be weird if everyone had everything. So
Yeah.
a lot of times what I've seen in cases, or recently a case that we handled today, and we're talking with the client and they're struggling to find the words. And and I had talked to their spouse, and their spouse said they never had a hard time finding words. They were quick and witty with their words. So sometimes they struggle to find words, or they lose track of the conversation, say, what were we talking about again? That happens. It's these little small things that sometimes they're not so obvious, but eventually they become obvious. So I mean, managing your schedule or forgetting to do tasks that you normally do. Some people can't remember anything, so they're constantly using sticky notes to remind them about everything. I
Yeah.
mean, I forget sometimes, but that's because
Yeah.
I'm just swamped.
Well,
But I always, find a way to remember stuff. But so some people, it's hard for them to manage life the way they used to.
Well, and it's interesting too because it's subtle because there's the trauma of the accident, regardless of how badly you were actually physically hurt. Just having an accident, it's very invasive. Like your nervous system, everything is, you're off balance, so to speak, for a while, right? But if you've got serious things that are showing up, I imagine, at first, let's say if I were married, my wife would be saying like, no, that's just since the accident. You know what I mean? Like it would be like justifiable. But then over time, if it doesn't, it sort of becomes the new normal. And it's only later that I could imagine someone being like, you never used to do that. And now you're doing that. And it's been 3 months. And if you hadn't, like it's temporary until it's permanent. So,
Right. And these cases, you really have to treat them differently than a spine case or an orthopedic case. Why? Because you have someone who you explained it perfectly, where you have an individual that was one way and suddenly they're in a crash and now they're another way. So, what I like to say is you treat these like wrongful death cases. The person that you knew before this crash, that's no longer the person. There's a completely different human being. It might look like the same person. They may sound like the same person, but
interesting.
what's going on in that mind is completely different than someone who was there before. And then a lot of times you see it again in rear end collisions. You'll see the we'll go back to our little skull right here, but the front brain right here, the frontal lobe, deals with those emotions and anxiety and those issues. And you start having, uh, in my case, clients, in doctors' cases, patients who have these types of issues. And really, they struggle.
Yeah.
And we have to bring that to light. That's our job as attorneys, paint that picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. And and I mean, it's just like going to a doctor. Like everybody would benefit from an advocate when they go to the doctor. Under normal circumstances, if someone were sitting there in the doctor's office and my doctor was giving me a lot of interesting or important advice about stuff, to have another set of ears would be beneficial, right? And so now imagine I'm in a brain injury situation post accident. There's going to be stuff that I'm just not. I mean, I'm almost by definition off off balance metaphorically, and so it's incumbent upon my friends and family to pay attention to what's going on. I would think. Um,
Yeah, and then friends and family are key to these cases. And if a person's having or has a brain injury, going to the doctor alone, they're not going to remember everything that's going on with them. And not only that, the family member or the friend has seen the difference of what that person's going through. And they're going to probably be a better historian than the person, because a lot of times there's denial. The person didn't, just doesn't want to believe that they're different, where everybody around that person says, yeah, they're completely different. We knew what they were like. This was a social bird, someone who loves to go out, someone who always wanted to be with people, and now they just want to be by themselves. And there's a history for that. So the friends and family, what we call before and after witnesses, really make a difference in these cases and can really bring to light what the person's going through and the experiences that they have, because sometimes it's not in the medical records, right? The medical record can say they have a traumatic brain injury, But what are the symptoms from that brain injury? And for example, fatigue is one of them, or a person is just, they don't want to do anything anymore, or they just too tired all the time because their brain has to work extra hard just to process what they used to process. So
Yeah,
they're
no, I get it.
fatigued and they're
Yeah.
tired.
What about, and this is, I think, is related, right? And this idea, maybe we talked about this in a previous episode, but I've got to imagine there's challenges that arise when, symptoms are reported days after the crash rather than at the scene. Like it's possible that I wasn't aware of the symptom at the scene, or maybe I brushed it off. I mean, what happens in that dynamic?
Right. You either brush it off or you're in denial, like you said, and you don't want to believe it. And so that is an insurance company's dream, right? Because they have defense lawyers and their defense lawyers are trained. If the CT is negative, it's not a brain injury. If they didn't complain immediately at fire rescue, it can't be a brain injury. And they'll start with that nonsense because, and the reason I say it's nonsense, it's the literature is there. It's complete nonsense. And they may even find a hired gun or a hired expert to say that and they got that person on the payroll. But the reality is, review the bulk of the literature. It doesn't have to happen right away. There's an onset or a delayed onset that could happen. Now, you just got to make sure you're noting it and have someone tell the doctors when you do have it immediately, get to those doctors and complain about it. Otherwise, it becomes really difficult to, relate it to, we'll call it a crash, the crash, or whatever was the inciting event that caused all those problems, the sequela of problems. So sometimes it's delayed, but again, sometimes it's denial, and sometimes you don't even know, right? And that's why you need the family members, like you talked about before. Bringing in those family members can make a difference in these cases. So don't get discouraged if you don't have the signs and symptoms right away. I mean, look, can they happen years later? Absolutely. I'll give you one example. We had a case where our client did sustain, he got a concussion. A concussion is a brain injury. And after getting that, he felt dazed and confused and sought some treatment. They noted he had some brain injury. And then about a year later, he started having seizures. The seizures were connected to that injury to the brain. And the literature is there. Sometimes you can get an onset of seizures 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So if you're having seizures or cardiovascular problems, that could be from the injury to the brain. Because remember, the brain is the computer that makes everything function. If the computer is not working properly, you may look normal on the outside, but it doesn't mean the computer is functioning properly.
You were talking about identifying symptoms, getting to the doctor. Obviously, from a practical point of view, I'm not going to the doctor every day, but documentation is important. Like you've said, are there certain types of documentation? I mean, not to get overly or even formalized documentation that people are going to want to maintain, because if it's showing up later, right? Once the symptoms start to appear, they're delayed onset. Should someone be keeping a journal, or what's the practical matter?
A journal is a great idea. Ideally, in a perfect world, you'd love to have someone again complaining to fire rescue in the hospital. So you want to have, the documentation is critical. So you want to have it in the medical records, in the reports. If the person's getting worse, you want to complain about what's getting worse, what symptoms are getting worse. Being referred to specialists, having a neurologist in these cases, having a neuropsychologist in these cases. And then your treating doctors evaluating you. That's important. If you're having difficulty at work, complain about it to your HR person. So there could be a record of it that this is a hard time for you. Daily functioning and behavior, you can put that in your journal, whatever it is, whether family members know it, coworkers or friends, they can all help put the pieces of the puzzle together so we can make the case and be able to present it. Because again, without documentation, without proof, right, you got no case. And so you may have a brain injury, but you're not going to the doctor, you're not going anywhere. How do we prove the case?
It's interesting because the work you mentioned, the work thing, going to HR, right? And on the one hand, I could see if I were in that situation, I might be hesitant to self-report almost, to go to HR and be like, hey, just a heads up. I've got to leave, I need a break, I got to go home on time. Whatever, you know, not apt to go in and be like, hey, my performance is going to suffer for a while. And I just wanted to admit that up front. But something short of that, I think, it's both counterintuitive, but I see the importance of it. Like just, hey, I had an accident and I'm moving a little slower, or whatever that means for your job.
Yeah, yeah. I had an accident. I'm moving slower. Can you give me some slack in the meantime until I get back up to speed or up to par? And then this way, if you've had that, you put it's in the record. It helps further, you know, put the puzzle together. Another piece in that puzzle is put together. Now we can use your employer or your HR person or your coworker to help tell that story.
Well, it shows I've been proactive, right? So there's that. Also, I'm just, off the top of the head here, it's like, okay, I had an accident. It's over the weekend. It's Monday. I go into HR and I'm like, hey, Sagi, in this case, you're HR. Uh, I had an accident over the weekend. Thanks for your concern. I'm fine, but I will probably have a couple of impromptu doctor's appointments coming up over the next week or so. It's just a nice, like, you'd want to, because sometimes, like, slipping out at 3 for a doctor's appointment. It's like, what's up with him? Oh, he had a car accident, and this is part of his recovery, if you will. And so that seems like a super smart thing to do.
Absolutely. You got to give it some context, right? So people know why you're leaving the office. And so there's some sort of documentation. And then it further helps, it helps the case. It makes sense.
It's like everybody's in on the fact that, yeah, he was doing the right thing to make sure and have his issues checked out. So anyway, man, I didn't mean to dominate the conversation here. And now here we are up against time. So as always, great to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
That's it for today's episode of Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents. If you'd like to learn more about Sagi Shaked and his work at Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers, visit their website, shakedlaw.com. You'll find resources there to help you understand your rights after a serious trucking accident and what it takes to protect your future. So check that out. And don't forget to share a link to this episode with someone who you think might benefit from it. Leave a review or subscribe. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.